Thanks. Okay, gang, I think we're starting to broadcast here. Let me start by apologizing that my wife is not here today. Betty, like so many of the spouses around our Air Force, is kind of all things to all people in both her family and mine. And I have a family health issue that popped up this week in my family, and so Betty, on about a 6-hour notice, jumped on an airplane to head home and take care of one of my family members who's got a serious health issue going on. So she couldn't be here. She wanted me to please offer her sincere apologies for not making it and to thank all of you for what you're doing. But we're going to start with, let's go Patrick Air Force Base first here and see if you guys have anything you'd like to talk about. I'll be happy to answer questions about anything at all you want. If I don't know the answer, I'll make sure I get an email address and we'll get back to you with it. Ask anything, guys, and if you need to be emotional about it, give me the emotion. I can take it.
This is Chief Master Sergeant Craig Neary. I'm the Command Chief here at the 45th Space Wing. We'll start you off today with Chief Master Sergeant Rob Musselman.
How you doing, General Welsh? I'm the Air Force Technical Applications IG Superintendent, and here's my question. The Military Retirement and Compensation Reform Report that was recently released outlines a lot of potential changes. Does the Air Force have a stance on any of the major initiatives, and what kind of timeline do we expect for implementation?
Repeat the first half of the first sentence. I heard the second part of it, but we didn't hear what the beginning was about. I heard the subject.
The Military Retirement and Compensation Reform Report that was recently released.
Yeah. Okay, got it. Thanks, bud. I heard the rest of it. I just couldn't hear what the topic was and didn't know if we were talking about retirement or about new tuna fish in the commissary or something. Let me tell. I'll tell you what we have officially have done as an Air Force and as a department, and then tell you what I think, just so you know. The Commission gave the retirement plan to the Department of Defense. We put together teams to look at every one of the Commission's 15 different recommendations, one of them on the retirement recommendation. And then we made some recommendations to the Secretary of Defense, and he has forwarded some recommendations to the President. The President sent Congress a letter saying that he is generally supportive of some of these things and other things he'd like more time to look at. Relative to the retirement plan, he said, I am generally supportive of it, but there's some details in there we don't really understand because the numbers weren't adding up when we look at the numbers the Commission gave us. And so he said, give us a little bit of time to take a look at it. The Congress then, in the budget markups in both the House and the Senate, has endorsed the general format of this new retirement recommendation, which I'll go through in a minute, and said, we're going to do this, help work with us on the details, and they delayed the implementation of this until FY18. So we got 2 budget cycles to go through where we can go back and forth on details. But I think you guys have probably seen the general framework of this thing. The first recommendation said we start putting matching in at 1% the first day everybody comes in the door. So whether you come out of basic training or you come out of officer candidate school or the Air Force Academy, doesn't matter. Wherever you start, the day you come out on active duty, the government puts 1% matching of your pay grade into this account. And they also, you put a percent in automatically. That's what the recommendation said. And then at 2 years and 1 day into your career, you're now vested, meaning anything that's in this account from that point on, you would take with you. That was the proposal. And then all the pieces of the proposal were that instead of your retirement account building at 2.5% per year of service, it was only 2% per year instead of 2.5%. So when you retire at 20 years, for example, your retirement pay would be based on 40% instead of 50% of your top 3 years of pay. So that was the big plan. They also threw in a continuation pay, like a bonus at 12 years of service that was intended to keep you to 16 and try and get you to a point where you'd stay till 20. And then when you retired at 20, you got that 40% of your base pay, and you got that out until age 62, at which point you would then get whatever the full amount was. So that's kind of how it was set up. The original proposal said that 2% per year stopped at 20 years. So if you served till 30, you didn't get 20 to 30, didn't add anything. It also only matched your pay at the 2 years and 1 day point. If you could up your pay input into your TSP as much as 5% more. And if you put 5% more of your pay, the government would match 5% more. So you get a total of 6% of government stuff and 5% of your pay going in there every month, which would be a pretty good deal. But that matching stopped at 20 years as well. So if you went to 30, it didn't get any additional. That made no sense to us. So when we saw this plan and Congress wrote into the budget that we're going to go with a 401k matching type of retirement plan, we then said, okay, well, let us work with you. So the chairman just sent a note to Congress this last week. He drafted a letter that I've seen and signed off on and agree with that says there's some things we should change. The first thing we think we should change is that you should not be able to up your matching to 5% until you re-enlist the first time. And that way you actually think through how much of your money do you really want to put in this TSP account during your first enlistment. Because the way the rules are written, if you put stuff into that account and you're not vested, the account goes to the U.S. Treasury if you leave. So there'll be more of your money in there that you can't get. Now that didn't make any sense to us. So we think you're much more likely to raise your monthly investment once you make the decision to re-enlist and realize you're getting closer to getting more benefit out of this plan. So we think we should delay that until the first day of your re-enlistment period. We also said you got to match that 2% per year. It's got to go as long as someone serves. So you can't stop it at 20. It's got to go to 30 if they serve to 30 or to 40. However long they serve, it ought to go up 2% per year. So that the letter recommends that. It also recommends that the matching from the government into the TSP continue for every year you serve. So until you separate, that matching will continue. And I think the Congress is going to agree with all those things, by the way. I don't think they will disagree with any of those recommendations. We also asked them not to tie that 12-year point bonus to the retirement plan because it actually confuses things. That is really not money that comes out of the retirement system. The services are going to have to pay that money out of our O&M funds. And so we said just separate that and give us the freedom to put more into that bonus if we want to keep people in the Air Force depending on how retention and everything else is working out. So they agree with that. I think they'll agree with that as well, but we'll wait and see. They haven't answered yet. So those are the big changes we recommended they make. The Congress clearly is committed to this idea of a matching plan of some type because they want to give the 83% of people in the Department of Defense who separate before 20 years of service some cash to walk out the door with. They believe that is the big benefit of this, and they're committed to doing it. And so what we're worried about is don't reward people who stay less than 20 by hurting people who stay more than 20. We want people still to stay in and serve a career in the Air Force. So the longer you stay, the more benefit the plan should be to you. The break-even point, according to the Commission, is if you invest 3% of your pay every month, once you can make that choice, and you continue that for 20 years, then if the market does better than expected, you may make a little more than you would under the old retirement plan over the course of a lifetime. If it does less, you may make a little less if it doesn't do as well. If you invested up to 5% of your pay, and they put that matching 5 to 6% in there, you would actually make more over a lifetime than the current plan would give you. So but it's about choices you have to make now. If you choose to keep more of your paycheck coming into your pocket and invest less in this plan, you're going to have less in your retirement plan. So the intent on our side is to get all the details from the Commission, make sure we have the kind of the calculator right on this, and then ship out a bunch of examples to you so you can see it. Because whenever they do write this into law, you're going to get a choice. They still agree with grandfathering everybody. So you'll have a choice to accept it or not. For those of you who don't like the new plan, just remember that in the Air Force, there's about 62% of people don't make it to retirement. So those of us who expect to stay till retirement or already past 20 years, we're going to be outvoted by that 62% no matter what we want to do. Because if you know you're going to get out before 20 years, the new plan's great. So you get the GI Bill and whatever's in your account. So most people in the department are going to like the new plan because a great percentage don't last till 20 years. And those of you who aren't sure, stick with the old plan. You know what you got. Okay? It's going to be a good plan. It's not going to be the same as the old one, but it'll be fine. And if you're willing to invest more of your paycheck on the front end and let the government match it, it's a really good deal. The hard part is giving up that pay every month, especially when you're younger, when you don't get a lot of pay every month. That makes sense? Okay, I'm sorry.
Let's go to Homestead, Chief.
Okay, Homestead.
Sir, good afternoon, sir. It's Chief Robinson. I'm here with my recruiters, and we have a question direct from my recruiting station first.
Hello,
Thanks,
sir.
Chief.
This is Master Sergeant Barry, Air Force recruiter. Question is, during fiscal year 15, the Air Force Reserve saw REGAF cut its manpower with force shaping initiatives, only to see REGAF increase higher tenure for fiscal year 16 and adding more of an emphasis on retaining their force coupled with prior service marketing efforts, with rapid changes not even a whole year after force shaping. My question to you, sir, is what is the plan to balance all three air components?
Yeah, good question. Let me talk force shaping first. The adjustments to high year tenure and the bringing people back into career fields are not in the career fields that we force shaped in. So this is a different set of career fields, different set of expertise. It's not the same. We're not going back and filling up career fields we just cut. That makes sense? It's important everybody understand that. The second thing is we made a corporate decision this last year that we're not going to cut any more people out of the active force. We can't. We can't do it and still do the job we've been asked to do. So force shaping was to get down to a size Air Force that we could afford to train and operate in FY16. That's why we had to do it in 2 years, because the law takes us back to the Budget Control Act levels of funding in 16. And so we had to do it fast so we could not do things like cancel training, cancel red flags, cancel NCO academies. We didn't want to do all that stuff anymore. And so we force shaped to get down to the force that we can afford. Now, from here on, the Secretary and I's view is we can't get any smaller because the things we've been asked to do right now have got us so busy and stretched so thin, we just can't keep cutting people. We believe we can grow the Guard and Reserve over time. So, for example, if we divest force structure, hardware, airplanes, mission sets, we can move those into the Guard and Reserve in some areas and add people in the Guard and Reserve to execute them and keep the people that hardware came from on active duty and redistribute those people to fix some of the shortfalls we have in career fields across the Air Force. We're really undermanned in maintenance. We're really undermanned in security forces. We're undermanned in some of our intelligence career fields and a few others that we have just got to get balanced the right way now. Those are the career fields, by the way, that we're doing this plus up in the next year or two to try and help with those imbalances that we have today. All that makes sense?
We're going to go to Eielson next.
Okay, Eielson. Wait a minute, where were we? Homestead. Okay, Eielson next.
Sir, Chief Roundup, you know, I guess I more have a request. We have our commanders, especially at the battles where it comes to our airmen, because they do some of this. I would love to see an opportunity to senior raiders and to recognize our airmen when they get promoted in the staff sergeant, tech sergeant ranks, as opposed to the virtual promotion release. It's a very difficult. We scramble the bases to pull down, and I don't feel like that's the way we should congratulate our folks on their promotion. I love the old days of a hand young senior airmen to congratulate them on making staff, and that commander be that person to congratulate them first, not them seeing on virtual. So if you'd like to call my senior NCOs here, have some more questions for you as well.
Yeah, Chief, actually, I personally agree with you. I personally agree with you.
It's just feedback.
Yeah. Okay, we're getting a little bit of feedback on this end, guys. I'm sorry. I'm confusing myself. I personally agree with you, Chief. And one of the things that we talked about at one of the 4-star meetings recently was that we ought to talk about this topic again. You know, we did it because so many people were leaking results of promotion lists, etc. And so everybody was hearing at a different time. So you had some units would be telling everybody a week ahead of time or 3 days ahead of time, and people thought that wasn't fair to the airmen whose commanders were waiting until, you know, the actual day of the release before they told them. And so to simplify it and to standardize it, we did this move. I actually really enjoyed, when I was a commander, having some kind of event to bring out the results, to identify the people, to look them in the eye, shake their hand. I personally agree with you. This is going to be a discussion topic at the executive session of the upcoming Corona, where I meet with all the 4-star and 3-star major command commanders the second week of June. So more to follow on this one, because I think this is one worth talking about again.
Okay, let's go to Charleston.
Charleston, any questions from your end?
Good afternoon, General. Mark Bronson, Command Chief, 618th Air Base Wing. I got a question from one of our first sergeants, Master Sergeant Angela Burderstock.
Good afternoon.
Thanks, Chief.
Sir.
Good afternoon, General. First Sergeant for the 437th Maintenance Squadron. My question is, with your ideas of resetting the Air Force and focusing on the fight again, do you think we'll see a formalized, what are we going to stop doing task list that you've referenced in the past? We continue to do everything and more, even though that we've had substantial manpower reduction across the Air Force. It just doesn't seem as if this message or concept is reaching the ground pounders by way of less tasks. Yeah,
no, that's a great question. Let me tell you what we've been trying to do, and I'll also share frustration with you on this one. When we ask about things that we can quit doing and we ask for input from the field, most of the stuff we get is not big Air Force stuff. It's inputs that are at the unit level. It's airmen who write in and said, hey, can you quit doing this? And this is something that they do at that squadron or that group or that wing. It's not a big Air Force program. There are some things that the Air Force needs to stop making you do, doubling reporting on things. There are some things we do in every functional area that old AFIs and old tech orders require us to do that just don't make sense anymore. And it's just going to take time to work through those. Our Air Force IG has the lead for that. There are, I don't remember exactly how many, but like 1,460 Air Force instructions. And we started 2 years ago updating them and going through them all. Some of them haven't been updated in 25 years. And so there's things in there that are driving people crazy because it's just stupid stuff that made sense 25 years ago that we're still doing. But I'll tell you, the things that I hear from airmen when I wander around the Air Force, the things that really frustrate them aren't things big Air Force is making them do. It's things that are happening at the unit level. It's ways of doing business that have become normal. And when new people come in and ask the question, they get told to shut up and color. One of the things that when I do all calls, I tell people at every base, remember the first time we opened up the Every Dollar Counts website, looking for ideas from the Air Force about what we could do differently and what we could stop doing. We got 17,000 inputs in a month. And because we got so many, we sent a note back to, I don't remember the exact percentage, but it was about 60% of the people who put an idea in. We sent an email back to them and said, just out of curiosity, why did you go to a website to offer a good idea? And of the people who answered, they all didn't, but of the people who did, it was almost exactly the same answer everywhere. And the answer was, because nobody here will listen to me. That's a horrible data point for the Air Force. And so I talk about that answer a lot. And I can give you example after example after example from bases on things like the quarterly awards program and all the work that goes into it. Things like the way people have to do rosters, the way people work schedules and shift schedules, and they think they have a better way to do it that would save time and give them more free time, but people aren't willing to try them. I just got to tell you, I'm working the top end stuff hard, and trying to make sure that our staff is not creating work that you don't need to be doing. If everybody would work the same from the bottom end, I think we'd probably be a lot happier, a lot quicker. Some of the things we're not going to be able to stop, and we just have to recognize that. Those are the things where we are operationally tasked to do them. We're not going to be able to say, no, we're not going to go take on ISIS. We can't say, no, we're not going to go to Nepal and do earthquake relief. Our PJs can't say, no, I don't want to go do combat search and rescue in Syria if I have to. But that's not the stuff that frustrates our airmen. The tasking signal is going to stay high, whether we like it or not, and we're going to have to respond to it. That's what we do. But all the other little stuff that we do to each other that our people get bothered by, our commanders and supervisors not making sure that when people are done with their work for the day, they get the hell out of Dodge. Go home. Go be a husband, a wife, a sister, a brother, a best friend, or whatever you are, and have a life. We can do that most places in the Air Force and still do great work. But it takes everybody at every level of supervision agreeing that this is possible, because we have a mindset of, face time's important, and if somebody's still working hard, I better be there, or I look like I'm not working hard. And I sure can't go watch my kids play Little League Baseball, can I? The answer is yes, you can and you should. Somebody will cover for you, and then you cover for them when it's their turn. So I really think that this is going to work only if we do it at the unit level and we continue to push it from the senior part of the Air Force. We're trying hard to do that at our end, but I'd ask you to kind of redouble your effort on your end. And where we find people in the middle who just are afraid to take the risk of making a change, because there are some, I'm not that naive, there are people out there who just don't want to rock the boat or make it look to their boss like they're not trying hard. When you identify those people, go to the supervisors you have in your chain, go to your command chief, go to your shirt, go to a flight commander or a flight chief or a commander that you trust, go to people just like you and say, hey, you got to help me work around this roadblock. All you guys know how to do that. Your young airmen don't. And so they get very frustrated by this. And that's who those 17,000 people were. Most of them were younger people. About 90% of the ideas that they sent to that website were for unit level stuff. 90%. Squadron level and below. And about 90% of them were really good ideas. So it was very frustrating for me to read those things and wonder why they didn't just go talk to their boss, their staff sergeant supervisor, and try and figure out a way to get it changed. This is a hard problem to fix because we are used to working harder than we should be working. The whole Air Force is. If I go to the office early in the morning, my team will be in the office 2 hours before I am. I finally convinced them an hour was plenty. They don't really need that much, but they wouldn't believe me. And in the Pentagon, that's just the way it is. We're used to doing it. Everybody expects you to be there. So I never go to the office before 7:30. I could get stuff done, but I just never go because the team will be in there at 5:30. And at the end of the day, I try and go home as soon as I can. As soon as the last meeting's over, I'm gone. Because I can do everything I can do in the office at the house. I got all the computers, the phones, everything. And then my guys will go home. If I stay, they won't, no matter how many times I tell them to. And your people are the same. I really believe we all got to be role models for this doing less with less, because that's where we need to go. We have to, or we're going to run people out just because they're worn out. You guys know that because you've been there.
Okay, Langley's up next, sir.
Langley.
Good afternoon, sir. Mark and Melanie Hurst here with three of our great teammates. First up is going to be Senior Master Sergeant Terrence Smiley.
Good afternoon, General. This is Senior Master Sergeant Smiley, Wing Career Assistance Advisor, and my question revolves around change. Over the past 3 years, we've seen tremendous amounts of change in our enlisted reports. We've seen changes with the way we deploy, and we've seen changes in EPME, our professional military education. And the question is, at what point do you think we will see a period of normalcy, or we'll get back to a period of steady state operations in the future, General?
Well, let me divide this into steady state operations and then steady state personnel policy, rules, etc. Administrative stuff. So we'll go operational stuff and administrative stuff. On the operational side, what we're going to try and figure out is what does steady state look like. I'll give you an example. People think that we used to not go TDY until the last 15 years. When I was a young guy flying airplanes, I averaged about 230 days a year TDY. Most people are surprised by that, but that was our Air Force. But everybody didn't go TDY. The flying squadrons went. A maintenance package would go with us from our aircraft maintenance unit. But the people who run the base, who manage the big base, they didn't go TDY all the time. So the cops, the supply guys, the force support squadron, all those people who run installations did not deploy all the time. But the mission part of the Air Force has always been an expeditionary Air Force. That's not going to change. When we come out of Afghanistan eventually, when we come out of Iraq and Syria, assuming something else doesn't pop up somewhere else in the world, and we come home in a bigger way, all of our ISR crews, our fighter squadrons, our intel folks are still going to be deploying. Our RPAs are still going to move to somewhere else in the world, do the same work. So part of the Air Force will always be expeditionary. But a whole bunch of the people who stand up bases, who run bases, who defend bases, they will come home, and it'll go back to looking more like before before 2001, and a whole lot more home station training, getting back to being trained and ready for whatever might happen next. So TDY rates will come down in some career fields, not in every career field. So the operational tempo will just go back to a different normal. It's still going to be busy, but it won't look quite the same. The administrative stuff that we're changing hasn't changed in decades. And so what we're trying to do now is take this. Now, let's just talk about the enlisted force for a second. We can talk officer too if you want, but let me just talk enlisted force. The reason we started a lot of this change is because there is a truism under the WAP system that I just flat don't agree with. And that truism is that if you're a tech sergeant, if you're a really, really, really outstanding tech sergeant, you will get promoted at exactly the same time as a really, really, really average tech sergeant. And in an organization that is working harder and is deploying more and is operationally as relevant as the Air Force, that's wrong. We need our best techs to become senior NCOs as fast as we can get them there so we can use them longer to lead the Air Force. That's my belief. And by the way, everybody knows that this is the way it works. It doesn't mean we aren't promoting good people to Master Sergeant. It just means we're not moving our best people forward as quickly as we could. That's why when Chief Cody came on the job, I said, Chief, look, we should be a performance-based Air Force, not a time in service, time and grade-based Air Force. And so let's take a look at a Master Sergeant promotion board, because we should be able to manage the numbers at that level. Be a lot tougher at staff and tech. But at Master, you should be able to manage the numbers enough to do a board like the Senior and the Chiefs board. And so figure out how we can do that. I'd like you to run a shadow promotion board for Master Sergeant. And this was a year and a half, 2 years ago. And so I'd like you to do it next year, and let's see what it shows us. So the personnel team put that plan together. The second piece of it, though, is if you're going to do a promotion board, you got to have an EPR system that lets you differentiate performance. At the same time that I started asking these questions, the RAND Corporation did a study about the EPR and its contribution to your promotion rate. And the answer was that until you're competing for Senior Master Sergeant, your EPR affects your promotion rate about 1%. That's it. It has less effect on your promotability than any other factor that's considered. And that's wrong. That makes no sense at all. And I don't know any airman that thinks that makes sense. And so I said, so if you're going to do a promotion board for Master, show me how you can adjust the EPR system and the feedback system that goes with it so that you can differentiate that great tech sergeant from the average tech sergeant. Because right now you can't do that with our current EPR system, and all of you know it. If I took any of you guys and I put you into a squadron, a new squadron tomorrow, and there were 10 tech sergeants in that squadron, you would know the best 3 by close of business tomorrow. And by the next day, you'd know who the bottom 3 were, and by the end of the week, you'd know 1 through 10. And then all 10 of them would get a 5 on their EPR. That's the way the current system was running. It's wrong. And so all the new system does is makes you differentiate when it's time to consider people for promotion between your talent. I like it because individuals now will hear that in the feedback sessions because the feedback is tied to the EPR form. You're going to have to tell them because you're going to tell them when they're ready for promotion, and it's really awkward if you wait till then to say something. And you tell somebody who's your number 10 of 10 that they're your 10 of 10 and they thought you were their number 1. It'll create better feedback for people. It's tougher on supervisors, but it should be tougher on supervisors. Supervisors should have these conversations. And I think it'll allow our younger NCOs to get better in ways that they didn't know they weren't already good at. Because a lot of them do think they're your best performer, and you know they're not. You just haven't told them. So that's what the intent is to get to this administrative stuff, is to get to a performance-based Air Force, because the world is changing so fast, the ops tempo is accelerating, the threat's getting more complicated, and we need people who can lead in that environment. It's got to be about performance. By the way, the other thing it's about is having an enlisted force in our Air Force that is so much better trained, is so much better educated than it's ever been before, and your job descriptions haven't changed in 40 years. That's also wrong. We should challenge you more. We should give you more responsibility. We should make you accountable for professional development and for identifying superior performers. It's all about that. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. It definitely makes sense.
Okay, Alan, where are we going
Hickam
next?
next, sir.
I'm sorry, where?
Hickam.
Hickam Air Force Base. Yeah, I wish we were going to Hickam next. Great, thanks, sir. Yeah, good question. Yeah, go back to my comment a minute ago about not changing the job descriptions. I mean, it's time to look at how we use this talent pool in a different way. And one of the ways we could use it is in the, not just the RPA force. I mean, RPA would just be the first piece. We'd have to look at the pilot force in general. Now, there are some impacts of doing that have to do with the balance of the Air Force. You can create situations, if you're not careful, where you've got really weird instructor-student relationships. It works well in a warrant officer force because everybody's essentially the same rank with little grades of difference in between them. It's a little tougher when it's a staff sergeant to a colonel, but it's worth looking at. And so I actually got an update on the briefing yesterday. The timeline we're on for making a decision on this is the Corona meeting this fall. So at the June Corona, I asked them to come back with some specific details about things like what exactly would the composition be of a test class if we started a test class about a year from now. How many of what types of specialties would we consider? Should it be mostly RPA sensor operators in that test group, or should we make it a little broader than that and not just take people who are already very familiar with the mission and bring in maybe half RPA sensor operators who want to become a pilot and half airmen who are just strong performers everywhere else and have no aviation background, and give them the same kind of tests we give when we recruit people into this career field as officers. And the ones who score best, we put some of them in this first test class. And then the second class should be a little more percentage of line Air Force airmen, and it should be a bigger class. So they're going to come back with the details for that, and they're going to come back with the details of the analysis behind how much money we would save as an Air Force if we put 25 or 50 or 75 or more % of the RPA pilot force were enlisted. Because the life cycle cost of a tech or a master is much different than the life cycle cost of a lieutenant colonel or a colonel. And so how much money could we save? And the other thing I asked them to come up with is what are the people-related issues that would come up if you did this. For example, you might be really excited about being an RPA pilot and going into it and getting an aviation bonus and all that as a staff or a tech. And when you make master, you're still really excited about it, but now you're flying right next to this major or lieutenant colonel who's making a heck of a lot more money than you are. And they're the commander, and you're listening to them. And when you first start, you're probably okay then, but after you've been in the business for 15 years, you're probably not going to be as happy about putting up with that, because you're going to know an awful lot about the business more than that new commander does, and they're making a lot more money. So what are the things that we've seen in other career fields where this became a problem? We're going to talk about those at the June Corona, kind of finalize the taskers for the analysis, and then come back with a decision briefing in October or November, I can't remember when it is, at Corona. And the idea would be if we start it, we would kick it off a year later on the 1 October of whatever year that is, 16. And so that's the idea. It's one of those things that if you rush into it without thinking through it, we can really make a mistake here, no matter which way we went, either throwing the idea way too quickly or jumping into it too quickly. So we're being pretty deliberate in the planning because we want to understand this. But here's what's not a question. Can enlisted members fly RPAs? Oh, yeah. I have no question about that.
Okay, let's go to Patrick, sir.
Patrick.
Hello, good afternoon, General Welsh. I'm Master Sergeant Herbo, Flight Chief of Diagnostic Imaging. My question to you is, with the advances in technology and the high use of UAVs, where do you see the value by spending more allocated funds on manned fighting platforms? And is the A-10 debate part of that conversation?
Yeah. No, let me eliminate the second thing first. All the A-10 discussion is about is prioritization of requirements. When the Congress passed the Budget Control Act, it took $20 billion a year out of the Air Force's budget. $20 billion a year. I'll give you an idea in a minute of what that means to us in a one-year period. And so what it meant is that we had to cut $20 billion each and every year. And what we did is took a look at what do the combatant commanders want us to buy, because our job is to build the force that they need. And they give us our priorities. We don't establish those. So we went to the combatant commanders. They walked through our different mission sets. We walked through the airplanes and the people and the type of capabilities we have where we provide them those things. And we said, what are your priorities? And then we cut based on their priorities or where their priorities were not. One of the things that is not on their list at all is additional CAS capacity by keeping the A-10. It's not an Air Force prioritization, it's the combatant commander's prioritization. We would all like to keep the A-10. I don't want to get rid of the A-10. But we've got to cut $20 billion from something every year from here forward. And when we prioritize everything else we're doing, this was lower on the priority list than other things that the combatant commanders want us to fund. I've spoken directly with every combatant commander each of the last 2 years. They've seen every decision in our budget, and they unanimously agree with this priority order. They don't like the idea of getting rid of the A-10 or anything else any more than we do, but they agree with it. The public debate on this is completely different than the reality of the prioritization discussion inside the Air Force. The only thing that really bothers me about it is the idea that without the A-10, we'll lose thousands of lives on the battlefield in the future. You guys need to know that over the last 7 years, we have flown about almost 160,000 CAS sorties. Of that number, about 120,000 of them were flown by airplanes other than the A-10. 80% of them were flown by other kinds of airplanes. And we have not lost thousands of lives on the battlefield as a result. It's just not true. Now, do we want the A-10 for the danger close fight? Yeah, we do. But we don't have enough money to keep everything. What the combatant commanders tell us is that here's the priorities we want you to follow. So as long as Congress keeps funding the A-10 and leave it in the budget, that's great with me. But if we have to cut other things, the combatant commanders won't like the decisions. So that's the first thing. Give me the crux of the first part of your question.
With the,
Can we go back to Pat?
What did you say?
Yeah, repeat it.
Oh, okay, I apologize. With the advances in technology and the high use of UAVs, where do you see the value by spending the more allocated funds on the manned flighting platform?
Yeah, we've spent an awful lot of money building up an RPA enterprise here over the last 12 to 15 years especially. We have gone from 11 caps in 2006 to 65 that we're growing to today. That is billions and billions of dollars. I mean, like 100 billion plus. We have added about 35,000 people to the ISR enterprise, while we've cut 50,000 people from the Air Force in total during that same time frame. So we've made a big investment in ISR. What we have not done is dramatically reverse the percentage of manned versus unmanned aircraft in the Air Force. The percentage of unmanned is below 10%. It'll probably stay below 10% for a while. We do not have the type of sensors that can replace your brain or your eyes or your ears. We haven't figured that out yet. And as a result, having a human in the warfighting loop remains critically important. For some missions, you can do that remotely with a human in the loop. But for other missions, you really need the on-site, on-scene situational awareness that can interpret the battle space and make the right decisions based on everything that's going on. And so if I took you and I put you in an airplane and told you to close your eyes and flew you in the middle of a battlefield and then said open them, you would know more about what was going on around you in terms of situational awareness within the first 5 seconds than an RPA operator would be who'd orbited over a specific target, except for the target they were focused on. Almost instantly you'd know more. So it doesn't make sense to take humans out of the warfighting environment. By the way, there are other missions I don't think you're ready for the RPA to do yet. You probably wouldn't put your family on one to go on vacation. You probably don't want one flying nukes around. I mean, there's just some things we're not ready for yet. So RPA should be used for the missions that it makes sense to use them for. If you compare a U-2's time on target, because the human in the pressure suit is kind of limited to 12 hours, and then they just got to get out of the airplane, as opposed to a Global Hawk, which will stay there for 36 hours doing the same thing. It doesn't mean it can do everything the U-2 could do, because you take the human away from the platform, but you can do things in that environment with an unmanned platform you just can't do with a human in it. Those are the places we ought to be spending money in the RPA world. The big thing to remember about RPAs is we're at the right flyer stage. We have just started this business. They're going to get more and more cosmic. They can't get more and more expensive. We can't let them do that. We got to look at different and innovative ways to use them, like Airmen have been doing for the last 15 years. Some of them are going to be nanotechnology and swarming groups with autonomous control systems. Others are going to be controlled by an F-35 with a pilot in the loop and a whole bunch of little wingmen that they launch out into the battle space doing jamming, strike, intel collection, all kinds of things. And the world's going to change in the remotely piloted aircraft business dramatically over the next 20 or 30 years, and we'll be at the front edge of it. It's an exciting business.
Okay, let's go to Homestead.
Homestead. Thank you, sir. Doing great, sir. Yeah. Let me let Lisa talk about this one for a minute so you know exactly what the policy guys are thinking, and then I'll tell you my opinion on this one.
So as far as promotion, I think it is, it will always be tied directly to promotion when you are competing at your higher ranks, because that's what we expect of you at that rank, going to senior and chief. But
actually, Chief Cody and I have been talking about this one a lot, because the way education is going is it's less aligned with a specific curriculum of training and thought in a particular area, as opposed to a little broader approach to getting a degree in that area. And so where CCAF today is tied to whatever specialty you have in the Air Force, is there a way to give a little more flexibility to that, where part of your CCAF credits could come from a little broader spectrum? We do it a little bit when you look at the verbal side and the writing side, and there's options within that as to how you get the credit. But if you actually broaden it and let, for example, Sergeant Davis do IT stuff, even though that's not really in line with his particular AFSC, all of us have got to be better at IT stuff. Why can't that be a flexible block in your CCAF curriculum where you can get X number of credit hours in a broader range of things that would still contribute to your CCAF degree? That's the question you're asking, isn't it, Sergeant Davis? Yeah, Chief Cody and I have actually been talking about this.
I think it's something definitely worth looking at.
Yeah, I think it's something worth talking about. I tell you what, Sergeant Davis, I'll take this and talk to Chief Cody about it, and we'll get Senior Thomas will take it back to the A1 policy guys, And I'll raise this as another executive session item at Corona here in about 2 weeks, okay? Here in about 2 weeks. Okay. Yes, sir. Eilson. Eilson, you there? Eilson, you there?
Sir, can you hear?
We got you now.
I have Master Sergeant Kerry Franson from.
Good afternoon, General. Sending airmen home when they the end of the reality in a maintenance career field is a 10 to 12-hour shift, and that was even before we lost a lot of our manning. When I send my NCOs home for the day, they're still expected to prepare for a PT test, do volunteer work with their airmen, get an off-duty education, and now they're expected to do 504 hours of PME in their off-duty time, in addition to taking care of their families. Are you concerned about NCOs are taking on?
Yeah, I am. Some of the things you said, I wouldn't agree that they all have to do all that right now. I think the idea is to spread this stuff out in a predictable way over your career, so they're not worried about doing 504 hours this week. The idea is figure out exactly what needs to be done when. The balance on the PME stuff of the online versus the residence, for example, is intended to give them back time with their family by not having to be TDY for as long to attend some of these courses, and figure out what is the minimum amount you can do in the online version that is not the same thing that's taught in the residence course, so that you're prepared for the residence course and you get time back from your deployment and TDY to go do this school. Now, it'll take us a little while to get that balance right. I mean, clearly it's going to. And part of the problem at the front end is we don't have the right faculty in place at Gunner to build, we didn't have it, we're getting it now, to build the curriculum in a way that is good. It's interactive. It's something you enjoy studying, as opposed to making it like a super CBT, which would be like shoot me in the head time. And so we actually took about 90 student years of officer PME away from the officer side in order to pay for an expanded faculty to build online curriculum for NCO PME. It's going to take us a year or two to get the whole team in place and to change the game, but we want our online education to look like any university in the countries now. That's where we're trying to go. And it'll include options for online master's degrees, bachelor's degrees, everything, and everything should be linked together so when you do something, you get credit for it. And it applies to more than just one thing. So if you just talk PME, we're trying to go to the place where you have less demand on your time/TDY days, that you could get more time back with your family. The other stuff, the demand signal you talked about, I thought was interesting because a lot of the stuff that you mentioned, for example, volunteer, we expect them to volunteer. Actually, what I started this out talking about in the EPR system was promotion is about job performance. It's not about who volunteers the most. I think it's wonderful if people have time to volunteer. I think it's great if they believe that's important and they want to do it. But what I'm looking for is an Air Force that values job performance above all things. So if you have things at the unit level that drive your people to feel like they must volunteer, even if it's hurting their family time, then you guys need to change whatever's driving that. Because the big Air Force process is not doing that. That's one of those unit level things just because it's the way we've always done it. Here's what drives it. Let me give you an example. Your quarterly awards program, you have boards probably at your base, don't you? Is my guess. You can give me a heads up, thumbs up or thumbs down if you do or don't. Do you have boards for your quarterly process, your quarterly and annual awards? And of course you have the rehearsal boards. You've got you got to put the packages together before the boards meet. Everybody's got to dress up and look good. You probably don't nominate airmen who look goofy. You probably don't nominate airmen who speak with a lisp because they're not going to get past the board. Doesn't matter how good they are at their job. And you're going to tell your airmen if they want to win, they better go volunteer because that board is going to give them points for volunteering. That is not an Air Force requirement. It's just something that's always been in place and we just keep doing it. When I was the wing commander at Kunsan, the first quarter, I watched our senior NCOs spend an unbelievable amount of time on the quarterly awards process. Now, some would argue you don't have much else to do at Kunsan, but it was thousands of man hours. And so the second quarter, I told them, you can't do boards this quarter. It's all verbal. And it's a 10-minute presentation at the squadron level by your supervisor to your squadron commander and command chief. The individual never appeared before anybody. And then the squadron commander and command chief had to take to the group level for the group board, which was the group commander and the group chief, and they had to do a 10-minute verbal presentation on their nominees. And then the group commanders had to do the same thing at the wing level. No airman ever appeared anyway. No form was ever filled out. And interestingly, a couple of things happened. The first thing was that the commanders at each level and their chiefs really got to know the airmen that were being nominated, because they're the ones who had to talk about them. The second thing that happened is different airmen got nominated and different airmen won. So we had a young lady in the med group, for example, who won NCO of the quarter. She had gone to the board like 3 times previously at Kunsan because she was fantastic, but she spoke with a lisp, and she was very nervous about it, and when she got to the board, she would just implode, and she'd get 0 points in the communications block, and she had no chance. We had a young comm 2-striper who won Airman of the Quarter who looked like Ichabod Crane. He was very gawky and ungainly and not comfortable in his gigantic feet yet, and he didn't look like a recruiting poster. But he was the best comm technician at the base, hands down, and everybody knew it. And in this process, he won the award. Everybody felt good, and it saved thousands of hours of time for our senior NCOs and the guys who used to put all these packages together. Now, I'm sure as soon as I left, they went right back to it. But they don't have to go back to it. So a number of the things you're talking about are things I believe you control. If there's things in Air Force instructions that drive the things you're talking about, we'll change them. Help me figure out what they are. And if you can't get anybody else to work on it through the chain of command, send me an email. I'm on the global. You won't be the first person to do it, by the way, I promise.
Okay, let's go to Charleston.
Charleston.
General, Master Sergeant Donahue from Comm Squadron. My biggest question is getting back to PT, getting to the PT test. I know that your office 6 months ago, a year ago, looked at the PT test, determined that it wasn't the waist measurement that was causing a lot of failures. But I was just wondering, because I know, I'm assuming that the office looked at a lot of just stats. They just looked at numbers. I know a lot of airmen, whenever they do fail, their waist measurement is the first thing that's checked. And once they failed that waist measurement, then they don't care about the rest of the test. And I know that's the wrong answer, but that's what we're seeing a lot more, or we're seeing a lot more of. I know we changed it now to where if you fail the waist measurement, you still now have a chance of passing a comprehensive body fat test. I'm just wondering, is there going to be any more look at the PT test of changing it, making it a little bit more, I guess, less for the waist measurement and more towards how many push-ups, sit-ups, and run you can do?
Yeah, not while Chief Cody and I are here. I'll tell you why, though. We actually spent a year looking at this. We spent hundreds and hundreds of personal hours reading the research on this, talking to the scientists who put the test together, looking at the DoD policy as well as the Air Force policy, because it's all connected. One of the things that very few people know about the PT test is we are not required to do the annual, remember the taping we used to do? The body fat taping that had to happen in every orderly room for every airman every year? The reason we don't do that anymore is because we have a waiver from the Department of Defense to not do that because we scientifically incorporated body fat into our PT test in the way we assess for the events themselves and the abdominal circumference measurement. So all that's connected. So if you take the abdominal circumference measurement out, we're going back to taping everybody in the Air Force because that's what DoD requires. The other services still do it. Those of you who remember that know how god-awful that was. It was impossible to manage. It was an unbelievable additional duty for people, and it really caused huge pain and suffering everywhere. It was just hard to do. And so what we did do is add back in the ability, if your abdominal circumference was too large, to go get taped, and if your body fat was fine, then don't worry about it. Your commander can just write that off and go, not a problem. They pass. Here's the statistic that came out of our look at abdominal circumference. Because, guys, I'm not a skinny guy. Abdominal circumference is something I got to think about. It keeps me working out. And I'm old enough now that working out's really getting tiring. You know how many people have been kicked out of the Air Force for abdominal circumference only? Here's the number. Actually, there have been a couple. But of all the people who've taken the PT test since we started it, the percentage of people who have been kicked out of the Air Force because of abdominal circumference only is 0.00003. I mean, and all of them failed it at least 4 times. I mean, it is an infinitesimally small number. So the idea that people get kicked out all the time for abdominal circumference and nothing else is simply not true. People who fail for abdominal circumference, the great percentage of them fail something else as well. And what they end up having trouble with is passing everything. So we looked at this from every angle possible. We talked to everybody who wanted to throw out an opinion, people who were critical of the test, people who were supportive of the test. And I'll tell you this, I got to the bottom line of abdominal circumference is not a reason to change the test. If you change the test, we could look at that, but it's not a reason to change the test. Because in general, this PT test has changed the fitness level of the Air Force. For those of you who've been in long enough, and some of you have been, how many times did you go to a gym at 5 a.m. 15 or 20 years ago and have trouble finding a piece of equipment? Oh, by the way, you couldn't get into the gym at 5 a.m. 15 or 20 years ago because it didn't open until 7:30 or 8. And there were only about 10 people on every base who were muscle heads who were in the weight rooms. Everybody else did intramurals. It is a completely different fitness culture, and you can tie the start to the PT test. So in a big scheme of things, it's done a great thing for the Air Force. And so screwing around with too many of the details doesn't buy us a lot. It creates pain, and I don't think it changes the individual results that dramatically. And this is from a guy who worries about the abdominal circumference measurement every year.
Okay, let's go to Langley, sir.
Yeah, back to Langley.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Senior Master Sergeant Ken Repair from the 633rd Air Base Wing, and my question is about the DSD process. Since inception of the DSD process, many airmen are challenged to perform in special duties they don't initially want to do. However, leaders recognize their potential and steer them that way. Do you feel, from your perspective, that the process is meeting the Air Force's initial intent?
Yeah, very good question. Thanks for asking that. Yes, I believe it is, and Chief Cody believes it is, and all of our major commanders believe it is, especially those who have some of these specialized duties working in their command. If you talk to General Rand at AATC, he probably has the majority of them working in his command. He is a huge fan of the new process. But here's something that has changed, though. The first cycle, we had a lot of people who were non-volled into jobs, because we were looking for real talent, and the people who signed up were not people the commanders thought were the best people available for the jobs. Volunteerism is still really important, but you can't volunteer without good job performance and expect to be considered. And so the first group of people that went to some of these jobs, whether it was women going to BMT as MTIs when we tried to bump up the numbers, or it was other airmen who got put in to do other duties that they really weren't excited about compared to what they would have preferred to do, but their performance was such that their commanders nominated them, they really didn't want to go to these jobs. And if you talk to them, like I've had the privilege of doing, as has Chief Cody, when they first got there, they were all going, oh man, this is not what I wanted to do. I'll do it, and I'll do my best, but I wish we hadn't gone this way. If you talk to them at the end of these jobs, or you talk to them a year into the job, they have changed, most of them have changed their tune completely. They see the need for the outstanding performers to be in these jobs. They feel like they've made a contribution to the Air Force in the jobs. They'll tell you they think we have their jobs right as far as which ones ought to be on this list. And they'll also tell you that looking back on it, they should have volunteered. And the big trick, though, is going to be, do we in fact reward good performance in these jobs in a significant way when it comes time for promotions, etc.? That's going to be the test. Because if we do, this will become something everybody wants to do. If we don't, we'll have the same people concerned and complaining, until they get in the jobs and they're convinced it's a good thing. But the people who are going are doing great work. And so the gaining commanders believe we got it right, if nothing else. We'll see over time. We are willing to adjust this every year, by the way, to try and make it right. And these guys know that on the policy side, Chief Cody tracks this pretty closely. And there's lots of discussions that I'm sure Lisa's been part of, that should we adjust this? Should we change it for this career field? Should we add a few more here or a few less here? We had a problem this last year in that some of the nominees that came in were people who had administrative action against them in the last year. And the commands forwarded them as nominees for these jobs. And I went through the roof. They may be great airmen, and maybe if they were a couple of years past the administrative action, they should be nominated again. But in this rating cycle, they had administrative action taken against them, and now their commanders are sending them forward for these kind of jobs. That will kill the idea that this is an elite group of people. So we got to be very careful about letting that happen. So we made a little bit of an adjustment there. But Lisa, anything else you'd add on this one?
We currently have a DSD working group that is scheduled to meet on the 4th of June. That'll be led by Chief Cody to relook at the process, to make tweaks where we need to make tweaks. It is something that we are always looking at, and we're always improving, and hopefully it will be the best program that it could be in the way it was meant to run. And I think we're already there now, like you said. It's really, it continues to improve every quarter.
Just out of curiosity, what do you think about it?
General, I like the process. As a former first sergeant, I know what it takes to perform in some of these special duties, and I've talked to some individuals who've gone through the process and who are doing phenomenally well. So I think the program is working very well.
Okay. Yeah, I'm hoping that what ends up happening is, if we're credible in rewarding the people who do this well, that we will end up with those great people who have the capability also being the ones who want to volunteer. I mean, that's where we're trying to get to.
Okay, let's go to Hickam, sir.
Okay, Hickam. And by the way, just because Betty's not here, if any of you spouses have questions, fire away. I'll answer for her. I know her really well. Ooh, great question. Let me talk about unit level facility security and people security, and then let me talk policy and kind of the broader, how do you keep track of the overall threat. At the unit level, the thing I get asked most about is, why can't I carry a weapon to work? I get asked this everywhere. And everybody points at Fort Hood and says, hey, look what happened. If more people have been packing. By the way, I'm from Texas. Everybody in my family is packing all the time. So I'm used to this question even at home. The problem is, if you brought your, we have a lot of people who have a carry license. They have a weapon in their vehicle, but when they come to work, they have to take it out because they can't wear it onto the base. So all the services have this issue. The problem is, if you bring all your weapons onto base just in case there's an active shooter, all of a sudden everybody with a weapon becomes a threat to every security member responding. So if the security forces or the MPs on an Army base respond, and you're sitting by your car with a pistol in your hand holding it out, you may die. They don't know who's who. They don't know who's the actual shooter, and they're going to suppress the threat. And so if you're a security forces member, you really don't want a whole lot of people pulling weapons out of their back pocket or out of their car when they hear a shot. It's also very difficult to figure out in many active shooter situations, how many shooters there are and who they are. The typical one where you have some guy walking around in full body armor and a mask with a weapon makes it a little easier, but they don't all look like that. Some of them, they take shots, they walk down the hall, and they're hanging a pistol by their side. You don't even see the weapon. And if somebody else has a weapon in their hands, they would become the obvious threat. So we got to be careful about creating a problem for security responding to a situation like this. And I think that's a valid concern of our security guys. One of the things we have done is approved people who are trained in security response and people in certain workspaces that are removed from normal security workflow patterns to carry weapons at work. And they're trained by the security forces. They're built into the response plans. They'll have a radio available in their workspace, so they're connected to the security response. And so those workplaces that are removed from where the cops usually are will have the ability to defend themselves if something went wrong. So that plan is being developed, which I think is a kind of a good compromise position. When it comes to the greater threat to families, people living downtown, you know, the recent list that ISIS put out with 100 names on it, had people's home addresses on it. That's scary stuff. Now, a lot of those addresses were wrong, by the way. They were old houses, or the name didn't match. But whoever lived in that house is now concerned. That was not tied to any specific threat. It was all stuff that was gained but just by internet research. But the list came out, and people kind of got surprised a little bit by it. Everybody on that list was contacted by Air Force OSI if they were in the Air Force. Everybody was told exactly how their name was accessed, where the information came from, because we did the same kind of research to figure it out. And we're told how much of a threat we really consider this to be or not to be. The OSI does a great job of overseeing and running our threat and security working groups across the Air Force. And those are updated routinely. Your commander is getting an update every time anything comes out that affects anything related to the Air Force families, or deployed airmen, or the bases that you live on. So when we had the recent, force protection conditions change in the continental United States, that was as a result of just a concern about changing the game occasionally to keep people on their feet and make sure that we're not becoming too predictable in the way we do force protection. There was some other reporting connected to that gave an indication there could be a problem somewhere, but it wasn't necessarily specific enough to target a particular place. And so everybody just went into these random security measures. We'll continue to do everything we can to watch that. I'll tell you this, my OSI guys brief me every time there's a change. And then the first thing we do is make sure the major command commanders and every wing commander is briefed. So we pay a lot of attention to this. That doesn't mean the threat goes away. And I would encourage you to always keep this at the front of your thought process. Teach your people to be smart. Don't put silly stuff on social media that lead people right to your front doorstep. Don't do things downtown that put yourself at risk by doing silly behavior in public places. I mean, just be careful about how you act, how you operate, and make sure all your airmen are thinking the same way. The world's a different place than it was when I was a young boy. But we've got to act a little bit differently.
Okay, let's go to Patrick, sir.
Patrick.
Hi, General. Sergeant Matthews, the 4th Support Squadron Superintendent. Sir, General Hyten talks a lot about competitiveness in space. The advancements by countries such as China can provide a real threat to our wartime strategy. Are you concerned about our space superiority capabilities in the future?
Yeah, you know, whether we want to fight a war in space someday or not, we really don't. As a nation, we've said we don't. There are other countries creating the capabilities for them to do it. And so we can't ignore that. I mean, there is a boogeyman in this business, and we got to be ready for him. And so what General Hyten talks about routinely is this necessity of looking at space as a warfighting domain. And people don't like us using that term because it scares people. But the reality is, if you don't look at it that way, as we're planning future capability, we won't be able to do warfighting there if we ever had to. So resiliency of satellite systems, the ability to maneuver, the ability to create real situational awareness in space, to do ISR of the space domain, to characterize threats that may or may not be there, the ability to respond to those threats and remove them if necessary. All those things are things we better be thinking about, and we better be thinking about how to produce capability where we don't have it. Yeah, I'm worried about it. I'm worried about it a lot. I think John Hyten has defined the problem very, very well, and I think there's a lot of people all the way up to the White House paying attention.
Okay, let's go to Homestead.
Homestead. Yeah, are you talking about the parts that are leading you to worse NMCS rates, etc.? Homestead, I lost you a little bit. I think the question was, do we have a plan for more money for spare parts? Is that right?
All right, let's come back down.
Homestead, I'm sorry. We'll come back to you. We're not hearing you right now. We'll come back to you in a minute.
Let's go to Ilson.
Ilson.
I have seen Master Sergeant Terry Dale.
Good afternoon, General. I'm currently an ALS Commandant. My question kind of goes back with the new system and percentages, get the highest rating. I have a staff sergeant right now who are instructors. What has been, I guess, taken into consideration for the differences between AFSCs within a squadron? My staff sergeant does a totally different job than other staff sergeants in the squadron. And even when I go back to LRS, I've got men in that best at their job, and there's airmen as well. Your vehicle maintenance, the AFSCs within a squadron. When you've got the best and the best and the best, who gets the highest rating?
Did you catch that?
I didn't.
Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. You broke up. You broke up pretty badly on that one. Let me take a second here and see if we can piece together what you asked, so you don't have to repeat the whole thing.
I think they were talking about the percentage, kind of the quota, or when they're rack and stacking, whether they take into account in their same squadron different AFSCs, because in her, as the ALS Commandant, has multiple AFSCs, the staff sergeants do different things, then when she's back in the LRS squadron, they do different things.
Is this in relation to force distribution?
This is for the EPR stratification.
It's the force distribution.
The stratification, well, she's talking force distribution because of the rank structure. The problem is, I'm not sure, in an environment such as ALS, they all work for her. So she'll stratify her folks as she would. If she's not a member of LRS
Let's ask her if that's the question.
Yeah.
Was the question that as you're in the ALS, who stratifies the people there because they come from all different AFSCs? Is that the question?
Within because she has a staff sergeant as the commandant, but then when she returns to LRS, competing with the best vehicle ops and the best POI troops, how do we differentiate? How do we be able to properly recognize the right person in forces?
Yeah, let me let Eric talk about this for a minute, then I'll tell you what I think.
If I'm understanding you correct, when an individual leaves, say, ALS, gets racked and stacked for force distribution, because we're talking about staffs and techs, is that not the question? We're not getting. Are you shaking your head no? We're not hearing you clearly, so we're not sure what the question is.
I'll keep it at ALS. Keep it with ALS right now. So I can rack and stack. They were hired. They are best of the best. I hired them. However, I belong to the fourth quadrant. So how staff sergeant is to rate him and the superintendent rate him. How do I get somebody that works at the fitness at their job or that works at the DFAC that's rating going to happen when there's different jobs within a squadron?
So given a force support squadron, you're asking how different AFSCs, such as a 3S or a 3M or an ALS instructor, will all funnel up for force distribution to the commander. How is that commander to rack and stack those individuals? Is that the question? Can we get a shake? Head nod? Okay. Like the general said earlier, it's about performance, and that is the focus of the new enlisted evaluation system. It's all about performance. So if an individual who is in the DFAC, you've got a 3M in there and doing a phenomenal job, doing the best of the best, and that individual has racked and stacked and earned that force distribution, which which earns that must promote or promote now, then that individual will get it. It should be regardless of AFSCs within that unit. And FSS has been doing this for a while. Obviously, the force distribution limits who gets that far right marking, but it's still based on performance. And as the general said, that's going to be the focus going forward. It's about performance in the job.
But, by the way, we do this now on the officer side of the house. The senior rater rates officers from every different specialty, and they come together at the senior rater level, and you have to rack and stack them across all those specialties. It actually works very well. It's a different mindset. Senior raters have to get more involved with their people. They have to know them better. You've got to really have a chance for supervisors to come talk to you and give you discussion about their folks, so you get a feel for who are the best performers. But you now have somebody who's a trusted agent in the system who is going to help stratify people for that promotion board. We couldn't think of any other way that you could do it without it looking like what we have now.
Okay, let's go back to Homestead, sir.
Okay, back to Homestead. Yeah, great question. And sorry we couldn't hear you last time. We got you loud and clear now. We have actually plussed up money the last 2 years in our weapon system sustainment account, and we'll keep it up there this next year. One of the problems we have is not money in that account, it's understanding what the problems are in that account. Last year, we actually went out and told every flying wing, you will fly your flying hour program. We had stopped doing that about 10 or 12 years ago because of the operational tempo, and we were letting people just turn back in flying hour money when they couldn't spend it. But what we did, the bad behavior we created, was we quit tracking the reasons we couldn't spend it. And so Air Force-wide, nobody was consolidating the reasons that you at Homestead or the guys at Hill or the guys wherever couldn't fly your F-16 flying hour programs. So we didn't get the fact that we were at 82% manning across the Air Force on the F-16 flight lines. We didn't understand which spare parts were driving all the NMCS rates down below where they should be, or driving the rates up above where they should be. We just didn't collect all that stuff because the wings quit submitting it because they didn't have to. They just turned in the money. And so we put the rigor back into the flying hour program, not to make you do stupid stuff, but to make sure we were tracking why we couldn't do the planned training. As we do that, we can now get a clear picture of where we need to put these resources that we're plussing up in the budget. So the intent is to do exactly what you asked about. But we got to get the right data, so we put the money in the right places.
Okay, let's go to Charleston.
Charleston. Yeah. I'll tell you what, Chief. I'd start by telling all your airmen if they want to be part of the solution, we've got assignments down there. We'd be glad to put them there, and they can help fix all the things they see. Second thing I'll tell you is during the force management and QFRB, I actually went down. I spent some time in the call room. I know how they do this stuff. The amount of work those people do that is great work is actually phenomenal. If you look at the number of mistakes that you mentioned might have been made in the QFRB or other processes, they were so small compared to the thousands and thousands and thousands of transactions that went perfectly. And that percentage stays about the same every year. So could we get better? Of course we could. We could be better at customer service everywhere in the Air Force. from every unit, customer service organizations to the Air Force customer service organizations. And I think we need to make that a goal. We should try and get better. If there are specific things that we can identify where there were more problems than in other areas, we can focus on those and try and adjust them. I'll tell you this, it's not because people aren't trying to do it right. And anybody who thinks that is just wrong. This is very hard business. And every time you tell somebody something they don't want to hear, they're unhappy. Whether you did it right or not, you're wrong. I'll give you an example. In the force shaping stuff last year, when we first started the force shaping, and everybody went crazy about the Air Force is now on a strategic pause, they're screwing everything up in the processing, they're changing guidance on what's eligible and what isn't eligible. Remember all that stuff? Big article in Air Force Times about it, all over the blogs. None of it was true. Because I saw all the same stuff, and I went steaming to General Poor and said, what is going on? Here's what happened. All the guidance that was put out to everybody to start this thing, you remember that I sent an email to every airman and said, hey, it's coming in 6 months. Then I sent another one about 2 months out and said, it's coming in 2 months. And then a month out, AFPC sent a note to every airman who was eligible. And in the notes I'd sent out, I told them, if you don't get a note, you are not eligible. You don't have to worry about this. If you do get a note, go talk to your chain of command. Go talk to your supervisor, your commander, and get a real feel for how you fit in this and what they think your chances are, especially in the Quality Force Review Board. I also sent a note to every commander in the Air Force and every command chief and said, you will sit with everybody eligible in your organization and talk to them about this stuff. And here's how you get information on who's eligible and who's not. Told them exactly where it all was. And then we started. In the first couple of weeks of the applications going in, thousands of airmen who were not qualified for the programs submitted their names for the programs. And so the poor guys at AFPC are seeing all this going, holy cow, what did we screw up? And they reacted just like I would have. What did we do wrong in the guidance? We must have made a mistake. People wouldn't apply for a 15-year retirement if they only have 10 years of service, but they did. And so they thought they screwed something up, and so they just stopped processing the applications to go back and review all that guidance to make sure we found what we'd done wrong. But we'd done nothing wrong. People just didn't read it. People who didn't get an email did apply. People with 10 years of service did apply for a 15-year retirement. If they'd read the whole message and not just the first 3 lines, they'd have known they weren't eligible. If they'd looked at where to go look at the data files to see if their AFSC was eligible, they'd have seen it wasn't. We didn't change eligibility in any AFSC. All that was urban legend. When I visited wings and talked to commanders and talked to top 3 groups, I would literally look at a room full of people and just say, you guys know exactly where to look to get this data, right? So you can tell your airmen. And I had people looking at the floor and looking at the ceiling, looking everywhere but in me, because none of them knew where to look. And these were the same people I sent the letter to, asking them to brief their airmen. I think we let our airmen down by not communicating well enough on this, and I'll start with me. I didn't communicate well enough on it. But it was not the poor folks at AFPC. Now, there were a couple of cases where they got frustrated as they're getting yelled at and probably said some things they shouldn't have said. Human behavior gets in here somewhere. And we can fix those things. But the only thing we changed online, really, if you look at from the day 1 of force shaping to the day last, was that instead of putting a line on airforce.mil that you clicked on to go to the data, we put buttons. That was the big change. But the data stayed in the same place the whole time. Anyway, so I guess my point is, help us identify, Chief, what those things are that we're not doing well as an institution, and we'll go after them aggressively. So if you've got examples where you can narrow down, instead of AFPC is not doing this right, AFPC is doing thousands of things right. And we got great airmen there who want to provide great customer service. But if there's something we just repeatedly get wrong, let us know and we'll go fix it. And AFPC will lead the effort. They want to be great at what they do, just like you guys are great at what you do. I believe in them, just like I believe in you. But if you can help us narrow it down a little bit and give some specifics other than an anecdotal example, you know, all the things that were the examples, you mean, of things we made a mistake on and then they made right. The biggest chunk of mistakes we made was about 19 people. And they were immediately offered their choice of what they wanted to have happen as a result of that mistake. And that was actually the computer generating emails to the wrong Social Security numbers. Nobody at AFPC screwed anything up. It was literally a computer hiccup. But those 19 people got to choose what they wanted the outcome to be. They could stay or they could go, their choice. As soon as we found out that was the problem. So in every case, AFPC did the fairest thing once they identified a problem. But percentage-wise, the problems were a very, very low percentage of the overall activity. But they get a lot of attention and they affect people in a negative way, so we got to fix them. So help me point at the right ones, bud, and I promise you we'll get after them.
Okay, sir. We're out of time.
Okay, gang, I'm sorry. We're out of time here, and I got to let you get back to your lives anyway. First, thank you for taking your time to do this. Thanks for the questions. They were great questions. Secondly, I'd like to thank our A1 folks here for joining me. Guys, thank you for taking your time to be here and for everything you do to support these great airmen. And third, and most importantly, just thank you for what you do. I just can't tell you how impressive you are. I can't tell you how proud I am of what you do. I can't tell you how much we want to make everything right for you every time we can. Don't be subtle. Don't be upset about something, concerned about something, and not scream at your chain of command about it. That's why we have chains of command. And if you find a roadblock in there and you just think, especially you guys, because you know what's real, what real problems are, if you can't get past commanders, senior leaders, whoever, and you can't figure out how to get at a problem that's negatively affecting your airmen, send me an email. Just send me an email. I'll lose your name and keep the problem, and we'll work it from the other end. But make sure you're getting a real problem, not just somebody's individual concern. We get a lot of that too. It's a big enterprise, and we got to be able to operate it day to day. And so sometimes things go wrong, and we just get off on a wrong track. We are willing to fix it. I promise you. And everybody on the air staff knows that. I believe everybody at AFPC knows it. And so let us know how we can help you. And by the way, you guys are taking care of airmen every single day. Thank you for doing that. Nobody touches more airmen than the people who are sitting around the tables on this particular hangout. Nobody. Thanks for what you do. Thanks for leading them so well. Take good care of each other, folks, and take care of your families. All the best.